Thank you, John. Good evening, everybody. I must say you're quite a brave soul to want to know about FedRAMP, and for all of you good people staying late and tuning in to listen to me about FedRAMP. So I must commiserate with you and appreciate your enthusiasm and willingness to talk about government and compliance and FedRAMP. So kudos to you for that. John, thank you very much for that kind introduction. What I would like to do is sort of briefly walk you through a presentation I have to help organizations sort of understand some of the nuances in doing business with the federal government in particular. I must tell you that one of our fastest growing markets is actually the Bay Area. I think we've helped over 12 companies at this point get through the, what we call the, accreditation process or get through FedRAMP. And that trend seems to be accelerating because a lot of the innovation and new solutions that come up in the Bay Area are what large organizations want. So obviously, there's a lot of new stuff happening in your neck of the woods. And so I'm very excited to have this opportunity to talk to you. Let me try and share my screen. Hopefully you'll be able to see it in just a second. So what I'll do is sort of walk you through a brief presentation about FedRAMP and what it means, and especially in the context of cloud. So really, for starters, FedRAMP is, for all intents and purposes, a compliance program. It stands for the Federal Risk and Authorization Management Program. It's run by a government agency, and it's really designed to help commercial organizations, startups, SaaS providers, PaaS, platform as a service providers, basically get the stamp of approval such that they can then essentially sell their services to a government agency, and the government agency that they're doing business with is assured. So, for want of simplification, just think of it as a good housekeeping seal of approval as a certification from a particular agency. So that's what I'll talk to you a little bit about. Again, I'm GP. I'm the principal and founder of stackArmor. I've been in the DC metro area at this point for almost 25 years. And again, almost 15 of those 25 years, I've in some way, shape or form worked with a federal customer or agency. So again, I've had the privilege of helping a number of these government agencies adopt cloud. I did my first cloud migration in 2009 for the White House. And again, the cloud is a sort of a different way of hosting data. So it has its own nuances from a security standpoint. And obviously federal agencies have some of their unique challenges. So I'll talk to you a little bit about what FedRAMP is, and then more importantly, why should you care? And what are some of the nuances? Please feel free to ping me with any questions. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to be here in front of you today. We've assembled a good team here at stackArmor. We've been privileged to be growing pretty fast. So Martin Rieger, he is a former Navy vet. He's our Chief Solutions Officer, has done a fair amount of work in the compliance space. Terry Grogan, he's a compliance architect. He's a former Air Force vet. Again, has done a lot of work with compliance, security, and cloud. Bhumi is our compliance director. She's also associated with the government. So again, we've assembled a pretty good team here that understands cloud, security, and compliance. And so we bring a lot of that expertise to our customers. So really quickly, a little bit about stackArmor. We are headquartered in the DC metro area. We are primarily a AWS shop. We've again done a fair amount of work in the AWS engineering architecture, particularly in the context of compliance and security. Again, I've had the privilege of seeing strong growth. And again, it's a testament to some of the work that we do around compliance. So again, we bring sort of the compliance angle to cloud and security. So really quickly, I think we touched upon this a little bit. So again, as I briefly mentioned, the COVID crisis currently is accelerating a lot of need for innovative solutions. I think right now we have over 6 companies, I think 4 of them from the Bay Area, that are providing solutions to the government. For example, some of them are in fairly diverse areas. So we have 2 or 3 companies that are in the area of, for example, COVID testing. So they have a solution where a member of the Department of Defense or a federal agency can go in and get tested, and their COVID test results are required for performing whatever work they do. There are other innovative solutions, for example, for notifications. So for example, if in a building there is somebody who has COVID or something, and they need to go in and have a need to go in and communicate to people within that building. So lots of interesting solutions coming up. And again, a lot of that innovation, as I mentioned, is coming from the Bay Area. And so really, really the subject of my talk is to share with you some of the nuances of compliance. I mean, a lot of folks in the startups that we see and the solution providers that we see, they have no trouble with AWS. They have no trouble with security. It's just that compliance piece that sometimes trips them up. And unfortunately, when you do business with the government, there is a compliance and documentation component end to it. So really, again, what I want to do is talk to you a little bit about FedRAMP, talk to you a little bit about what are some of the nuances, and hopefully answer any questions you have. So really, why should we talk about FedRAMP? So really, as I briefly mentioned, we are seeing a huge growth in demand for cloud by federal agencies. It's forecasted to be almost a $9 billion market just for cloud services alone. The federal government spends about $80 billion a year in cloud services, sorry, in IT in general, of which about 9 billion now is cloud. And so there are certainly, huge segments of the agencies that are increasingly growing for cloud services, especially driven right now with the pandemic, where, remote access solutions, digital solutions are really, really accelerating in terms of adoption by these agencies. And so really, while the market is great, but again, the FedRAMP compliance program is, as I briefly mentioned, a security program that is required. So again, an agency can demand to review and see your security posture. And so some of the challenges historically that have held back startups from pursuing this program has been just the sheer cost associated with it. So, typically you might hear stories about, it takes a long time, 12 to 18 months. It costs a lot of money, $1.5 million. And, from a startup standpoint, or from a lot of commercial organization standpoint, there is high business risk because, the results are not guaranteed, and, it's sort of a process in dealing with the government. And so these have been some very common challenges. And so that's where we, from the stackArmor standpoint, saw an opportunity to go in and streamline and sort of focus on this niche area in helping organizations meet some of these challenges. And so the way we have done that is we've basically built a unique sort of solution that combines consulting services along with IT and automation, or tech with automation and documentation. So we've sort of tried to create a solution where we're able to go in and solve critical problems. So typically when we engage with an organization, and let's say you're interested in exploring doing business with a federal agency, then roughly these are the kinds of topics that will come up and that you'll have questions about. So for example, one of the things that comes up right away is, can I go in and host in my regular commercial East-West region, or do I need to get a special enclave, which is just for the government, or do I need to host in GovCloud as an example? So I'm sure you guys are aware, AWS has the GovCloud region, which is a separate region from the commercial East-West. And then of course you have the East-West regions. And so the first question is, where should I host? So the answer to that is it depends, right? So if you have, again, different kinds of data. So if you're, let's just say, hosting data about missiles or, other sensitive defense information, more than likely they will demand that your data run in a GovCloud environment because it has ITAR compliance requirements as well as US citizen only access, things like that. So again, depending on the nature of your solution, the answer could depend on where it needs to reside. That's a common problem that comes up. The second one is, again, what's called the information categorization or the risk categorization, right? So for example, again, if you're just hosting research information, then perhaps the security categorization from a sensitivity standpoint is low. So again, the cost could be lower and sort of the threshold is lower. But if you're again hosting more sensitive information, again, the nice thing about this program is it's, people don't just make it up. There are very, very specific thresholds with which you can sort of understand where you fall, and you need to go in, and again, that drives your budget, that drives, potentially the complexity of your compliance journey, etc. But again, you need to be able to go in and find out, what is the nature of data that you're hosting. And quite honestly, this is not necessarily something to do with the government. Probably if you're doing it for your commercial customers anyway, it's probably something that you do in some way, shape, or form. This just makes it more specific and has sort of a method behind it in terms of precisely categorizing that. There are other nuances. One of the big pitfalls that commercial companies run into a lot is compliance with encryption requirements. So a lot of commercial services, they don't pay as much attention to the specific crypto modules that are being used in your solution. So we have to go and make sure that throughout your stack, any software, any operating system, any VPN, as an example, that you're using has a FIPS validated compliance certificate associated with it. And this program is run out of NIST. So again, there is actually a database. So if, for example, you're using a VPN and that's basically supposed to encrypt data in transit from your users to the cloud, as an example, then you have to be able to log in to this website and demonstrate that certificate that says that that encryption module is certified for use in a government system. And these kind of things, they trip up a lot of organizations. So again, that's where we help go in and highlight these kind of issues early on. There are some other specific nuances on what's called the accreditation path. Again, I won't go into that in a lot of detail. Again, as you're just like anywhere else, as you navigate the journey, there are certain nuances on how you can go in and get accredited or go through the certification process. One of the unique things about the FedRAMP program, unlike any other certification program, is in most other programs, let's say HIPAA or PCI DSS or ISO or others, it's a commercial to commercial arrangement, right? So you go in and pay somebody, you hire an auditor, they come in, they give you the seal of approval, you're good to go. The FedRAMP program is the only program where no commercial organization can give you that certification. It has to be given to you by a government agency. Neither us nor anybody else can come in and we can prepare you, but ultimately it is a government agency that has to give you that certification, which makes it a little bit unique. a lot of questions around, how much time will it take? How many resources do I need? What kinds of people do I need? One big question that comes up again and again, especially in the Bay Area context, is the use of offshore or international resources. So in general, for production systems, you cannot use offshore or non-US based resources. So again, it's CONUS or OCONUS only. So again, that is where certain organizations have to tweak a little bit, either their support model or they engage with service providers like ourselves who are able to fill in that gap either on a permanent basis or a temporary basis. Again, change control. So once you go through the accreditation process, a lot of startups and organizations are launching new features quickly. They're innovating, and so as long as you follow the change management process, which is well laid down, you have the ability to go in there. It's not a static program. So again, how do you do that? What are some of the nuances and rules you have to follow? Again, we help organizations basically walk through some of that. Of course, budgeting, how much money do I need? It's not a one-time certification and you are done. There is an ongoing continuous monitoring program that you have to budget for. These are, again, some nuances that are associated with FedRAMP. And then finally, sponsorship. Obviously, as I said, you have to have a government agency sort of sponsor you. So again, how do you find that agency? What's the right fit? What might be some pathways? So again, a mix of technical, business, and compliance issues. Those are typically the kinds of questions you will get if you're pursuing a FedRAMP accreditation. So again, this is a little bit of what we have done. Again, I mean, those of you that are familiar with Amazon, I don't think this is anything spectacular, but essentially what we have done is taken a common pattern of delivering an AWS-based landing zone and basically attached to it in sort of a sidecar fashion, a built-to-purpose security system that directly maps to the security requirements that FedRAMP requires. We've coupled that with documentation. I'll show you some of the documentation requirements. I think this is the part that most organizations hate. Yes, there is a non-trivial documentation burden, but the beauty of this documentation is it's fairly comprehensive. And once you do this with this particular organization or for this particular program, then every other certification, whether it is SOC 2, HIPAA, PCI DSS, or ISO, or any other certification, becomes a piece of cake, because by far this is the highest benchmark to cross. But once you do that, then you're good to go pretty much for any other compliance program. And then finally, we also go in and provide sort of continuous monitoring services. So for example, you have to go in and there are 58 specific requirements that have to be followed on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly basis, and reports have to be produced. That's why I said it's not just a static one-time piece. And again, for those of you that are running cloud services today, this is nothing new. It's just that you have to go in and do it in a particular way and produce the output in a particular way that the government is looking for. So this is sort of our solution, ThreatAlert. And again, our goal has been, and I think we've been pretty successful with that, is to reduce the time and cost by about half. And so I think we've been pretty successful. We work pretty closely with the Amazon channel. And again, we've, I think at this point, done almost 15 plus ATOs with different organizations. Again, standards are a big deal, right? So, I talked to you a little bit about FIPS from an encryption standpoint. CIS benchmarks are a big deal. I know a lot of commercial companies have started using them. So there's a lot of awareness about that, but Center of Internet Security, it's interesting. It's the only standard that's actually mentioned in the FedRAMP guidance with regard to use of specific benchmarks. There are other programs, CMMC. If you're a Department of Defense contractor, you have to follow that. Of course, OWASP from a applications and web application security scanning. So again, we've sort of packaged all of these services When I talk about security services, so, really, again, you don't have to use these tools, but when a system has to be FedRAMPed, you have to demonstrate the capabilities that are shown on the left-hand side under the security services column. I need to be able to have, for example, vulnerability scanning, web vulnerability scans if I'm writing a web application, have things like HBSS, host-based security services. And so this is where none of this, as you can probably see, is rocket science. But I think bringing it all together, making sure that it's there and it is FIPS compliant and it has things like MFA enabled with, again, accredited services, those are some of the areas that people need help with. And so that's where we have gone in and built a lot of the engineering and put it in place. I'm sorry, was there a question? Okay. So again, this is sort of the security system that I was talking about that's sort of attached, that we attach to a customer's account or VPC. Yes, so there is documentation. So this is the list of documents that need to be produced for a FedRAMP system. The good news is there are really well-defined templates for that. Again, the FedRAMP.gov website, I think, does a pretty good job in, sharing some of this information. They have good guides. Again, they have done a really good job in trying to help and simplify a complex problem. And again, there has been a lot of push from the agency's perspective to help startups, to help companies sort of engage with them and sort of demystify this process. And they're very welcoming of questions, and clarifications, especially from startups, because again, they want to see that innovation come into the government ecosystem. If you look at some of this, I mean, none of this is actually, should come as a surprise. If you're building out a large service and you are going after, let's say regulated customers, then some of this documentation is something that you would probably have no matter what, right? And so again, a lot of times though, this documentation set can be a little overwhelming simply because there are very well prescribed templates and you can't deviate from those templates. One of the things we do, again, in terms of our acceleration, because we have a predefined security system, we are able to go in and pre-fill these templates. So the customer just has to focus on a specific area which is pertaining to their application. So that's how we make things a little bit more streamlined. So this is sort of a quick view of, of the different security controls, not to sort of phase you out, but essentially just to give you a view on how some of the nomenclature is structured. These are what are called security requirements, or what we call controls. The way to read this chart is from top to bottom, left to right. So those different abbreviations are basically control families. So for example, AC is the access control family, AT is audit and training, is training, AU is audit, CMS configuration management, and on. And so against each one of those disciplines or control families, there are very, very specific requirements that have to be met. And so this, again, assuming almost 80% of the government systems are categorized at what's called the moderate level. So in total, there are about 325 security controls. And the nice thing is that, again, if you use a service like AWS, then, you get almost 43 plus controls out of the box. And a lot of the tooling that AWS offers in the context of the shared responsibility model enables the ability to go in and meet others. So again, all this color coding says is, in order to try and streamline this process, we help the customer meet over 50% of those controls and try and minimize the burden on what they have to fill out. I mean, one thing that's inescapable is that's the black part. Ultimately, it is a system that belongs to you, the customer, the SaaS provider. And so your policies, your procedures, no matter what, have to exist. So we can help you there, but you have to provide them, because the government is assessing not just the technology, but also the organization behind the technology. And so that's why, again, this program is a little unique in that regard. So then we basically talk about controls coverage, right? So I walked you through a little bit of the matrix. So again, if you use a cloud service like Amazon, the nice thing is you get certain amount of controls. We overlay those controls. And again, our goal is to get the customer to the finish line, which is what's called an ATO, an authority to operate. And again, we deliver approximately 226 of those, either fully or partially, such that we can go in and help the customer get from that number into the finish line. So obviously, there is a fair amount of work that's involved to get there. But again, that's why I made that comment about, a net 40% reduction in cost and time, because there is still work to be done. So we've sort of developed a process, to help customers. So again, I'm sure a lot of you are already familiar with this, build a landing zone with all the different security configurations, that sort of thing. Build out your security system. Make sure you've got the policies, procedures, the documentation to match your design. Harden the environment, use CIS benchmarks. Remove any unnecessary ports, libraries, things like that. Do penetration testing, do vulnerability scans. And then, you're basically ready for an audit. And then, once you pass the audit, you get into sort of the continuous monitoring. So a fairly sort of streamlined process that is not that difficult to achieve if you kind of know what you're doing. So along the way, again, we're a startup as well. Given that we've done this for a fair amount of time, we've also built some proprietary IP that makes some of this process simpler. And so that's really a competitive differentiator for us, where again, we go in and deploy these solutions within the customer's account. So ThreatAlert is our security operations and alert governance portal. So it collects the security data, which is then optimized for reporting for compliance. So it's not a real-time solution or anything. It's to help meet the compliance requirements. Similarly, OpsAlert. So if I get a chance, I'll show it to you. But one of the things we have to continuously make sure is that the environment that we are monitoring is constantly compliant, right? So it's not just a one-time thing. So I'll show you a page. Not every Amazon service is, FedRAMP compliant as an example. So I want to continuously monitor and make sure that the services are compliant, and we do that using OpsAlert. So this is to sort of just give you a quick view of some of our current projects. Again, there's a significant amount of demand both on the educational sector right now, federal agencies, healthcare, so a broad spectrum. So again, we do offer some solutions to help startups in particular sort of take on this difficult journey a little bit. And so again, please feel free to connect with John or send me an email if you like, or look me up on LinkedIn. What I want to do is just briefly walk you through some websites that I think might be useful to you. So this is, let me try and get this thing. So this is a web page on the AWS website. It's basically the services in scope page. It's something we visit, 10 times a day. But as I was briefly telling you, this is sort of, the chart that shows the different services. And so this is the FedRAMP program. And then if you're doing work with the Department of Defense, then this is sort of the area that you want to look at. But if, let's say, I'm going for FedRAMP, and if somebody says, well, you have to host in GovCloud, then the first thing you want to see is that all the services that you're using, are they in this list or not, right? So that's the first thing, is you want to go and make sure that you're only using FedRAMP accredited services. There are a lot of misconceptions in this area. So for example, some people think that if something is running in GovCloud, it automatically is accredited, and that's not the case. GovCloud has a number of services that are not accredited. So for example, Amazon Batch being a good example. It's there in GovCloud, but it's not accredited. So accredited and GovCloud is not the same thing. So, and as you can see, there are services that are not even in GovCloud, right? So you want to make sure that whatever your architecture is, that you're able to see it. So this is another good example. So, you know, EKS right now is obviously pretty hot. And so it is not compliant right through the compliance process. That's what this says. So again, you have to factor that in. And again, you have to have that conversation and sort of, and some of these compliance elements can impact your architecture. So again, you know, this is sort of a good page to bookmark if you have an interest, and Amazon does an amazing job in keeping this up to date. And then again, you know, DoD is a slightly different beast. Again, as you start to sort of, you know, look at the compliance programs there. So again, this is a good site for you to sort of bookmark and see if this makes sense to you, and you know, sort of start to do some of your research. And then of course, you know, the FedRAMP.gov website, that's a great one as well. If you're looking to do some research, there are a couple of things I recommend. One is obviously the resources section. So they have a number of documents here that you might find useful. So, you know, this sort of gives you a lot of background. If you have trouble sleeping, you can download some of these and start reading them. But again, as I mentioned, the FedRAMP office does a good job in collecting information and trying to share it with you. I think building up that basic brand of knowledge, I think, is great. And I think what's interesting is just one thing that to pay note to is this FedRAMP marketplace is a pretty neat and unique thing. It's the only service that I'm aware of that actually does an element of marketing for you. Obviously, there's a pretty significant investment associated with it, but once you are there, then you'll be amazed to see how many people visit this website and they just buy products and solutions by looking at this list here. So, you know, the FedRAMP PMO has done a great job in listing this. So, excuse me, this gives you a view of the different kinds of solutions. So, you know, again, if you're interested in the security space, Qualys is a great software company. They have over 66 authorizations. Outside of what we call the hyperscalers, Amazon, Azure, Qualys has the highest number of, ATOs. It means an agency consumed them. So again, you can get some nice competitive information if you're looking at either, you know, gaps. So if you want to go in and look at the kinds of solutions that are in here, look at the competition, things like that. This is an amazing resource. And what we are finding is, we, for example, just did a project for the University of Central Florida, and they just came here. And if you were here, then, you know, you were sort of deemed as viable. If not, then, so it's not just for federal, but a lot of public sector or education oriented customers use this a lot. So we are seeing a lot of positive benefits in sort of getting listed here. So again, I think it's a great resource. You should check it out, you know, for research purposes, etc. And then finally, this is sort of a quick demo of our compliance dashboard, as I showed you. So this is, again, you know, we run this inside the boundary. It runs within the customer's account. So it allows us to go in and monitor the different kinds of services that they're using and things like that. So again, it's a pretty comprehensive program. I know it can be a little daunting, but hopefully I gave you a little bit of a tidbit on that. John, that's sort of the end of my prepared presentation. Happy to answer any questions, clear any doubts, revisit anything that I might have covered.
Thank you very much, Gaurav. That was an excellent presentation. I'm glad I got to see that. Especially, it's interesting to see the marketplace for FedRAMP run by the government itself. I open the floor to the questions. If anybody has any questions, please ask. I see there's a comment. can you please share the web links? Gaurav, there's a question. Can you share the web links? How do you plan to do that, if you would? You can give it to me and I can post it on the Meetup, or you can directly post it on the Meetup as well. If and how has FedRAMP changed since it was first conceived?
I think that's a great question. So I've had the privilege of working with this program since its inception 2011. I think the program, it's changed from the perspective that it was a pretty unique program in the sense that it wanted to streamline the process of this security accreditation. And so the big thing is, it sort of started off initially with, just like any other government program, it started real slow. A lot of agencies were not even sort of following it. So in other words, you would have organizations that invested in the FedRAMP ATO, but then, the agency that would sort of talk about, this accreditation wouldn't accept it. And so there was a lot of back and forth between agencies and commercial organizations. So I think the biggest thing that I would say is at this point in 2020, the program is very well respected and very well established. If any agency wants to go in and buy a cloud service, and if you happen to be on a call with a government person, I think the first question they're going to ask you is, are you FedRAMP? And so I think the biggest thing that I would say that's changed is the acceptance of the program and the value that it provides. And the nice thing about that then is it actually helps reduce the overall cost for customers, because otherwise, if you had sold to, let's say, the Air Force, then they would have had a separate set of compliance requirements. If you sold it to the Navy, they would have another one. And so by using FedRAMP and the sort of DoD flavor, DoD CCSRG, you're able to just do it once and then it's acceptable to both. So I think that's sort of the big change. Great question.
Okay, thanks. The next question, how does this product handle Canada region? Like if I have AWS set up in Canada, then can you help us in compliance like PIP EDA?
Yes. So ThreatAlert is designed to meet any kind of a compliance requirement, because what we have found is we are based on the NIST SP 800-53 baseline, and if you read through it, it's really not something special for government. It's what if you were designing a system for real that met different security accreditations, which is the requirement specifically to serve these compliance programs, you would do those things, right? You would implement a firewall, you would put in place encryption. This just helps us do it in a systematic way. So I'm not familiar with pipe DA myself, but I'm happy to engage in a conversation with you. But this compliance standard, I mean, NIST is the Canadian government has implemented a Canadian government-wide standard, and that's also based on NIST. So I believe that the same set of security requirements would help you in any Canadian compliance standard as well.
Okay, next question. Can you discuss CMMC? Please discuss how to accelerate CMMC. 2 questions.
That's a great question. I unfortunately don't have my CMMC slides, but the interesting thing is think of CMMC as, depending on, your point of view, think of it as FedRAMP's little brother or little sister. Basically, it's a new cybersecurity maturity model that has been basically created by primarily the Department of Defense to go in and secure the supply chain. A lot of what was happening is, as you remember from the Target breach, the security breach is not necessarily, when you're looking for sensitive information, you're going after the weakest link. And so a lot of times it's, the third-party supplier. So let's say I'm after a particular sub design or a, missile design, then I might necessarily not try and attack the DoD, but I will attack, the small company that manufactures the, particular sensor or whatever it might be. So there have been a number of those kind of breaches. And so in response, the Department of Defense developed the CMMC program, which is approximately 150 to 200 security controls, which very roughly map back to FedRAMP. So, FedRAMP is the high watermark. CMMC is sort of a subset of those controls. And so really, in our view, if more or less, if you implement the FedRAMP low baseline, you're pretty much, compliant with CMMC. And the best way to accelerate CMMC is to use, again, FedRAMP accredited cloud services as the beginning point, right? So for example, there is an element, there is talk, CMMC is still being sort of formed. There is talk about reciprocity between FedRAMP and CMMC. So in other words, if I'm using a FedRAMP service and, then I will get credit for that in the CMMC language. And again, they're all based on the same NIST framework. So our recommendation is, and all the solutions we are building with ThreatAlert, so the ThreatAlert solution, I can share that link with you here as well, is if you're interested, it is for FedRAMP and CMMC compliance. So it's an AWS vetted solution. It's there for CMMC compliance, because again, the same requirements are required to be met by everybody, by every framework.
Okay, next question is, with stackArmor's assistance, how long does it take to get FedRAMP? Many variables, of course, so I'm looking for the answer like, it takes at least such long. How long does it take?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And my answer is it depends. But generally, if, let me share with you a story. So we had a customer, Somnoware. They're based in the Bay Area. They came to us in October of last year. We did a webinar with their CTO who joined us in April. So they came to us in October of last year, and they hadn't been on the cloud. They won a contract with the Veterans Affairs Administration. They have a pretty interesting software for sleep apnea and that sort of thing tracking. And so they came to us and said, we have to have an ATO in pretty short order. And so in that particular instance, they had a really smart technical team, really motivated. And so we were able to get an ATO with them in about 4 months. So October, we sort of engaged with them, did the migration in November, December timeframe, put the documentation package together, had it submitted by February. And I think by March, they received sort of their, interim ATO. So, and that's not that atypical, right? So what I would say is, if everybody is motivated, and when I say everybody, I mean everybody, that means, you, number one, as the service provider is motivated, and your customer, the federal agency, is motivated, I think you can get it done in about 4 months. So in general, what I normally recommend is to plan for a 4 to 6 month window. I think it's doable within that time. But again, there are outliers. Some people will claim that they can do it faster. Faster also means more money. So, in general, that's what I would say is, I think a 4 to 6 month period is reasonable.
Okay, next question from Sunil. Looks like a crowded field with many companies doing FedRAMP. What is the new pain point with everyone working remotely, including government employees?
Um, uh, so I'm not sure what you mean by crowded playing field with companies doing FedRAMP. I mean, um, there is a huge demand.
Sunil, do you want to chime in and clarify?
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the question in regard to compliant crowded field.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Sorry about that. I think my question was more related to entrepreneurship, geared towards entrepreneurship. If someone is working on a security, compliance, privacy kind of a solution, what they need to look for, because FedRAMP is already, there are many companies like stackArmor doing it. So are there any specific areas which the government agencies are coming up with new standard, new regulation in this COVID times?
That's a great question. I definitely don't want you to compete with me, and so I will have to be careful in my answer. I'm just kidding. I think a lot of what we are seeing in terms of general demand is a move towards more and more of digitization. I'll give you a couple of simple examples. A lot of almost all government employees and anybody who does work with the government, so we do government contracts, everybody has to carry a hard what's called a PIV card, right? So it's basically a hard token, and that's what's used to access any kind of an IT system. So just give it as a case in point, now with the COVID situation, all of those badging offices are closed, and there is a huge backlog to be able to get that. So people are now looking for digital solutions. So wherever, the whole actually process of digitization has just phenomenally, accelerated in every business process, right? So simple thing like badging, now they want to come up with a virtual badge, right? I mean, those problems have been solved on the commercial side with soft tokens and things like that. But the government has been slow to migrate. So there is a huge opportunity in that space, right? Credentialing, identity, digital identities, how to go and make sure that the person coming in and trying to authenticate them, they are who they are. Whole sets of, there's a lot of obviously requirements where, let's say if I'm applying for a loan and I have to submit paperwork, then, now there is nobody available because of, again, COVID to process that paperwork. So, again, what can we digitize, that sort of thing. As far as remote working and employees, there is a huge move towards basically using cloud-based VPNs, right? So for example, there's a company called Zscaler. They're doing exceedingly well. They have a solution where I can come in and it's a cloud-based, what they call next generation VPN, where I can authenticate and then they can give me remote access to applications. So, that's a great sort of, innovation that the government is adopting. I can't tell you off the top of my head if there are any new laws that are being, um, sort of created, but there is a lot of innovation, accelerated innovation around cloud adoption, right? So, as you mentioned on the security side, there's a lot of AI, can you come up with some capability that allows the government to check, whether the person who's logging in is, the person. Again, rule-based methods are not very scalable, right? So again, if you look across the spectrum, I mean, there's a lot of RPA, there's a lot of AI/ML. Those are sort of some of the hot buzzwords right now that are going on.
Great, awesome. Thank you, Gaurav.
You're welcome.
So the next question is, what was the name of that? Oh, somebody answered. Cloud-based VPN, Zscaler. Okay. Well, I don't see any other questions there. Does anyone have a question, last question to ask? Oh, we're almost at time. Nothing. So, well, thank you very much, Gaurav. I know it's really late. Everyone, Gaurav is in the East Coast, is in Washington, D.C., so it's almost 9 p.m. there. Thanks for taking the time to come and talk to us. It's very enlightening. At least I did not know much about FedRAMP, and now I know. So,
Thank you, John. Thank you for having me. And again, I think the kudos should come to your dedicated members for them to stay up after work and to want to listen to FedRAMP. So I thank you for listening to me.
I also have 3 new feedbacks from the team. Jeff says, another brilliant opportunity. I'm smarter now, thank you. Kevin says it was insightful, very insightful, thanks. Sunil says thank you. Alex says thank you. EP, John, and Diane. Kevin Tucker says great presentation. I finally learned FedRAMP is, what FedRAMP is and how it works. And Nasta says thanks, and everybody says thank you. Thank you very much, Gaurav.
Thank you, and good evening to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.